to where we started last time. Emotions, effects, and Emmanuel. We talked about quite a bit of things. We covered a lot. Some of the main things that we covered was not only our emotions, but the root of our emotions, where they come from, how our history plays a role in our emotions, how our background may influence how we see things, or how we are affected by certain things, and that's where we get our effects from. And just fast forwarding a little bit, why I put Emmanuel there is because during Christmas time, we love singing, about Emmanuel, God with us. Well, even outside of the Christmas season, in these emotions, in their effects, in our backgrounds, he is still God with us in those moments. So that's why, we decided to title it that way. And we're going to show later on how God is with us, even in all of that stuff. All right, so going back to the same topics as before, we're just kind of building and expanding on them. One of the main things that I want to cover before we get into our interview is, does the Bible support a holistic view of humanity? First, what is a holistic view, and then does the Bible support it? Right, so talking about a holistic view, we touched on it last time, about how in the Old Testament, when God was speaking to Moses and he was telling the people that you are to love God with your everything. And what is your everything? And it talks about with all your heart, with all your mind, your soul, and your strength. But then Jesus takes it to another level, and he says, not only should this relationship or should this pursuit be vertical as far as you and God, but it should also go horizontal, because Jesus added, love your neighbor as yourself. And then we have the different references when Jesus said these things. Now, when we talk about a holistic view, and I'm sure you all have heard about, you've heard that word in different terms lately, a holistic diet or a holistic, I don't know what other ways people have said it, but what comes to mind when you think of the word holistic? The whole it's really not deep. Whole, W-H-O-L-E, whole, like whole life group. Complete. So with the belief of Christianity, you're not actually living a holistic life if it's only about you and God. That may sound strange, but a Christian life isn't just about you and God. One of the reasons I say that is because in Matthew, we have a story of what's called the Transfiguration, and how Jesus was with Peter, James, and John on this mountain. And it says that, the glory of the Lord was shown, and Peter was happy that he was there, and it says that Moses and Elijah was there, and all of this amazing supernatural stuff was happening. And Peter said, it's good for us to be here. Let's make 3 tabernacles and stay here. And it said that Jesus ignored what Peter said. Now, if any of you have ever had children, which I know you have, there are some things sometimes that they say, because it's just so out there, what do? You just ignore it. You're just like, okay. And this is one of those moments. And it was one of those moments because Jesus wanted to show his students that in this life, in this human life on earth, it's not just about private relationship with you and God, but it's about how you interact with others as well. Because the rest of that story says, after all these things happened, they went into the city. They went into the village. So it wasn't so much that just it had to be the person and God alone, although you need that, but it's about humans interacting with other humans. I want to highlight a story that you may not have heard of. It's in 2 Chronicles 6, and I'll summarize it, and then we're going to hit verse 12. So there was this king. This king had an ailment. And when this king had this ailment, he sought physicians. Now, there wasn't a problem with the king seeking medicine or seeking physicians, but what happened was this king put his total trust in the physicians. The prophets were saying like, hey, you know, God said he was going to take care of you, or God said this or that, but he only wanted to know what the physicians said. And when that happened, God got angry. So this king, he had an ailment, and because he only trusted the physicians, God got upset. Now, how does that go against, I don't know if you all remember, but last time we talked about some misconceptions about concerning mental health. And one of the misconceptions was that it has to either be God and prayer or doctors and medication. We'll start from verse 9. And it says, for the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the earth to give strong support to those whose heart is whole. Some other versions say whose heart is blameless toward him. It says, you have done foolishly in this, and from now on you will have wars. Then Asa was angry with the seer and put him in stocks and in prison, for he was in a rage with him because of this. And Asa inflicted cruelties upon some of the people at the same time. The acts of Asa from first to last are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Verse 12. In the 39th year of the reign of Asa was diseased in his feet, and his disease became severe. Yet even in his disease he did not seek the Lord, but sought help from physicians. Verse 13. And Asa slept with his father, dying in the 41st year of his reign. And they buried him in the tombs that he had cut for himself in the city of David. So it wasn't that Asa, the king, sought doctors. And I know I said this 2 or 3 times already, but it was because he only trusted in those physicians. Any comments or questions? Interesting story. I encourage you to read this. 2 Chronicles 16, thank you, 16, that has that story. So what we see here, again, when we're looking at a holistic view of humanity, that God made us. God made us with a mind. God made us with a body. God made us with emotions. And sometimes your body, your mind, all those things, sometimes they need care. Sometimes they need care. And when they need care, it's one of those things where you seek the help that you need. There's this one thing that, and I'm sure we all have said it, when you're raising children or teenagers, whatever, at some point you say, your mouth is going to what?
Get you in trouble.
Get you in trouble.
Get you in trouble. Your mouth is going to get you in trouble. But what I find is that's an incomplete statement. Your mouth can get you in trouble, but sometimes your mouth can get you the help you need as well. That same mouth that can get you in trouble can get you the help that you need.
Yeah.
Of course, it goes into, what comes out of your mouth. Next one. Okay, so this is a Gallup poll done by the Gallup Research Group, and I found this to be interesting. So the question was, the question was, in general, how lonely do you feel? Now, keeping in mind that statistics don't cover everything. There are different variables and all of that. But this is just kind of a snapshot, in general type of thing. So, some people said I feel very or fairly lonely. Some people said I feel a little lonely. And then it said 49% said not lonely at all. Now the interesting thing about this, over 142 countries and territories that were polled, if you add these two up, it's 51%. 51% that said, I feel lonely to some degree, little, very, whatever. Now the question is, to me, the folks that they polled, they have access to all kinds of resources, all kinds of opportunity, in most of the countries that they polled. So why is it that if they had resources, if they had opportunity, how is it that 51% could still feel some degree of loneliness? I would venture to say that the loneliness may have nothing to even do with the resources. Because if you would have polled, take away the different countries, if you would have just polled, say, the most wealthiest people, some of them would have fallen into these categories, and they have resources and whatever else. So maybe it's not always this tangible stuff, the money or the resource or whatever. Perhaps this feeling of loneliness is more than that. I was speaking to somebody the other day about a particular church and how I was interacting with some folks there, and a church that had, we'll say, 800 people. There were people in there that said they felt disconnected or they didn't feel a sense of community. How do you be in a room of almost 1,000 people twice a week and you can still feel lonely?
They just attend in a fellowship.
Well, yeah, it could be more than just these things. So that was one thing I wanted to highlight. Some of these things kind of seep into expectations. I did a study one time. It was in the book of John, or it started in the book of John. And I asked the question, and I was told that that question had probably never been asked in that church. And the question was, have you ever felt that God disappointed you? And I understand that, you know, some people that have been in church a long time, they'll immediately go to, oh, you know, the Lord never failed me yet, and you know, He's my rock in a weary land and shelter in the time of storm, and on and on and on.
The key word.
And that's good. That's good. But in actuality, if you have felt that God has disappointed you, you're not alone. And that's actually something that is supported in Scripture. Now we'll kind of take our time a little bit with this one. So the question was, have you ever felt that God has disappointed you? And I just took these three. There's much more in Scripture, but I just took these three. So in the book of Habakkuk is actually built on two different questions. Why and how long? There are some bad things going on in Habakkuk. There's a nation that has overtaken Israel, and they're, you know, killing the people and just messing up the land and all that. So Habakkuk is asking God, well, why did this happen? And how long is it going to be this way? In 2 Samuel with David had, we'll say he had taken liberties with another man's wife. And God said through the prophet Nathan that that child is going to die. Then it said that David fasted, he prayed, he didn't want entertainment. He said, I need to pray so that God would change his mind. And then right here, it says, in the latter part of it, it says that on the 7th day, the baby died. David had an expectation, you know, all of those Psalms that we read and all of that stuff, how God is faithful and all of that. David wrote those. That's the same David. But then it still says the baby died. David had an expectation that I know God to be faithful. And it didn't turn out the way David had hoped. And then lastly, with Mary and Martha, on 2 separate occasions, they said, Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Mary said the same thing. Lord, if you were there, my brother would still be alive. In these and other instances, there was a disappointment that was there. So if you're honest with yourself, just looking over different situations in life or what have you, if you have felt that God has disappointed you, acknowledge it. But here's the thing. When we acknowledge that God has disappointed us, that should prompt us to prayer and trust, not to bitterness and resentment. You could go either way. And I say that because that's a big part of the book of Job. When you read Job, Job was disappointed with God. Job had an expectation that, hey, like, have I not walked up right before you? And he could have went either way. He could have went to disappointment and resentment, or he could have went to trust and prayer. So it's something that I'm hoping that more Christians would come to terms with if you feel as though God has disappointed you. Now, the problem with that is, even if you feel that God has disappointed you, you still have to acknowledge his position as God. Because you can get real disrespectful real quick when it comes to disappointment. And I say that because I'm sure we've all heard that, if something happened, you can't ask God questions, you just gotta take what happens. Well, the whole Bible is full of people that ask God questions, but not necessarily people that questioned God. So what's the difference between asking God questions and questioning God? The difference is your posture and approach. Grace can ask me questions all day, and she does. But if she finds herself questioning me, then that means her approach is, you owe me an answer, and you owe me an answer that suits me. That gets into the disrespect of not just, an earthly father, but when we approach God that way, you owe me an answer, and you owe me an answer that suits me. That gets into all of that.